Welcome, everyone. I'm Dana Peever, decision expert, author, speaker, and podcast host. You're listening to the Wildly Courageous Women podcast. More women than ever are faced with challenging decisions on a regular basis. I am so privileged to sit down with them to discuss exactly what they've gone through and how they've come out the other side, realizing their wildest dreams. I'm sure you'll be able to relate. And don't forget to stay to the end to take advantage of my latest free gift. Let's get started. Hello, you wildly courageous women, you. Welcome to the Wildly Courageous Women podcast. I'm Dana Peever, decision expert, and as always, we're here talking about decisions that have been made in our lives that were courageous or impactful or changed the course of our life, or even one that we wish we could go back on. Each week, I join you twice, once with a guest and once solo. Since I've been studying the science of decision-making for over 30 years, the majority of my life's decisions have been made very intentionally using my 5-step Decision Smith system and app. Today, I'm going to walk you through my thoughts behind the scenes. And it's going to be a little bit different today than I usually talk about. I usually focus on one decision and, walk you through that. But today I thought I would give you a little bit of insight into what the actual process looks like and tell you some stories about some of my clients and their aha moments. But before we get started, I want to remind you to stay to the end so that you get access to my latest freebie. All right, so for those of you who are familiar with the 5-step Decision Smith system and app, I hope that you've found it useful when you've been faced with tough decisions. For those of you who aren't familiar, just a little backstory. So it was over 30 years ago when I was sitting in a first-year psychology class in university, and we were talking about research methodologies. And up on the board, the prof put this big, onerous matrix that you followed from a mathematical perspective for making, tough decisions as it related to psychology and research. And I was fascinated by it. It was mind-numbing. There were so many components to it. But I've got a secret math brain, a secret math geek. So I understood how all the pieces fit together and what all the math meant and that kind of thing. And I walked away from that class thinking that, well, if there's this big, huge, cumbersome, onerous system that we use to make tough decisions as it relates to, psychology or engineering or whatever it is that we're working on from a professional perspective, there's got to be something for us, for our everyday decisions. There's got to be something that we can use to at least help build our own confidence in making tough decisions. And so I really set on a path from that day to figure out what that could look like. And I spent about 15 years developing my own process. And that's what is the 5-step Decision Smith system today. So really, when you look at the system that I built, 5 quick steps are identifying your decision, listing your options, defining your factors, rating your factors, then ultimately scoring your options. And while all that might sound well and good, you're probably wondering, well, how do I do the math and how does this all work? And that's where my app comes in. So you can download the Decision Smith app for free in Google or iTunes. And that's where you can go ahead and input the information for those 5 steps that I just listed. And at the end, once you've input, all the data and been really honest and truthful with the information that you're sharing, the app gives you a mathematical score and a percentage that points you in the right direction. And it's pretty phenomenal. Because what I've learned over time. So like I said, I spent about 15 years developing that system. And then I started sharing it with some like key clients who I thought would be able to give me some decent feedback on whether or not they even thought it was viable. And the response I got when I started sharing this was, where has this been all my life? You need to teach the world this, because this is crazy impactful. We make 35,000 decisions every single day. That's what our brain is faced with. A lot of them are easy, and we kind of make them in our sleep. But there are some tough decisions that we face. And over time, if you get better at listening to your intuition or your gut, that can help make you a good decision maker. But what my process has, the end result is that you become more in tune with your intuition because you're listening to it, because that's part of this whole process. But when you get that mathematical score and percentage telling you which option is the best for you, it almost always correlates to your intuition. So if you've got this app saying to you in black and white that this is the right path and it matches your intuition, if you do this process over and over and over again, and it keeps matching your intuition, you're going to develop such a deeper confidence in your own intuition, and you won't necessarily need to go through all of these steps each and every time. So, for me, I make a lot of decisions now without using my app, but I still use it because there are times when I just need that clarity. And I think that, as you continue to focus on decision making, your intuition starts speaking more loudly to you, and you just become overall more confident in that area of your life. And when I look at these things, I think one of the things that I'm trying to get across, or maybe that frustrates me, I'll be honest, is that people either don't see how important it is to be able to make tough decisions confidently and quickly, or they feel like it's something that they should innately be able to do, so it's embarrassing to ask for help, or they just don't see the importance of having the ability to make tough decisions. And that really frustrates me because, I give the examples. If you buy a bookshelf from IKEA and you open the box and you look at all of those pieces in the box, are you paralyzed? Well, maybe you are initially, but are you paralyzed not knowing where to start? No, you've got that little instruction book that has, the picture of the broken wine glass, if it's fragile and that kind of thing. You've got this instruction booklet that you can follow step by step to get the exact end results that is required. If you're going to a family picnic and somebody asks you to make grandma's famous cake recipe, you don't go into the kitchen and put some ingredients on the counter and, think, oh, this needs this much of this and this needs this much of that. You pull out the recipe and you follow the recipe and you're going to get the end result. So like that exists for making decisions too. And I want people to understand that. And I don't think they do yet. There's a large portion of people who do, but then there's a lot of people who just don't necessarily give it the attention it deserves. It's kind of like finances, you feel like you're supposed to be able to manage all your own finances without help. Or it's a really sensitive or personal topic that you don't want to get help with. But there are financial advisors out there that, that's what they specialize in. So I'm a decision advisor. I'm a person that has focused on this topic for over 30 years now. And nothing brings me greater joy than having a client have an aha moment. So let's talk about a couple of those. I remember I was working with a client of mine. She actually became one of my super users. She wouldn't make a decision without using the system. Her confidence built in her intuition over time, but that when there were tough decisions or impactful decisions, she would make a decision in her head, but she would always ensure that the app corroborated what she was feeling. So she had previously used my app to make the decision to move cross country to a new state. And, things were going well there, and she had been living in this one place renting. But the time was coming up that she would need to move out and find a new place. And she'd already decided she was going to stay in the same geographical area. It didn't necessarily matter to her exactly what town she lived in, but, she wanted to stay in the area. She was in Southern California. And so she came to me, and she had put some of her own deadlines on herself. So I knew she had to be out at the end of the month. And she was giving herself only to the 15th of the month prior to having to move out, that she had to sign a lease on a new place. That was her cutoff date for her sanity. And I thought it was great, be proactive, make sure that you've got a plan for yourself so you're not left in the lurch and without a place to stay come the end of the month. So I'll never forget, it was a Friday, and she, at that point, we had many coaching calls where we walked through the decisions together. But at this point, she was really comfortable going through the system herself by that point. So she called me, and we had just sat down to dinner, and I was just putting a bite full of food in my mouth, and she called. And she didn't often call. And I knew when she called, she needed to talk to somebody. So I excused myself from the dinner table, and I answered the phone. And she said, I don't know what to do. I've found, I've narrowed it down to these two places that, are as close to the criteria that I'm looking for. But I put them in your app, and they both came out with low scores. So, do I just pick the better of the two, even though they're both not great choices? And so she said, I need to make a decision. I think the 15th of the month was like it was a Friday when we talked. The 15th of the month was either the Saturday or the Sunday. And I said to her, I know you've imposed this deadline on yourself because you wanted to be, sure that you had a place. Based on the fact that neither of these options score highly, how would you feel about giving it the weekend and seeing what else comes on the market over the weekend? And, revisiting this conversation on Monday after you've watched the market for that amount of time, and, deciding at that point in time what your options are. If nothing else comes on the market, do you then pick the best of these two options? Or if something else comes on the market, do you wind up considering that? And you could tell she was struggling with that. And I had to remind her that deadline was a self-imposed deadline. Nobody else had put that on her. And the fact that, she was considering pushing it out a day or two still meant she was on top of it, and meant she was close to, being able to make a decision. But I felt like the weekend might give her some more options. Lo and behold, I got a phone call on Monday that just the night before, a new place had come on the market. She'd been able to get out to see it. She threw that option in the app, and it blew the other two out of the water. So she was so relieved that she didn't force herself to make a decision based on two so-so options, and that, she was given permission to give herself a little bit more time to, look for something that was more in line with the factors that she was considering when she was making this decision. So she talked about that for a long time. She's like, remember that weekend when you told me just to take the weekend? She said, I really needed to hear that because I was, set in my ways and I was going to make a decision. So thank you for that, because the place she wound up moving into, I think she wound up living there for 4 or 5 years. And it was a great place for her. It just turned out to be good all the way around. So, she loved that she had me to call in her time of need, and that, the situation worked out the way it did. There was another time when I was working with another client, and she was just at a stage in her life where she was feeling a little bit unfulfilled, and she knew things needed to change, and she was just kind of looking for something new, something different. And so we were talking through, a lot of her options and, what she could potentially do. And I remember we were reviewing the factors that she was taking into consideration, making sure that we had captured everything. So, when I do coaching calls, I spend a lot of time asking questions. I ask question after question after question. My background is HR, and I've interviewed thousands of people. So I think my practice asking questions in those interviews really helps me be able to ask the right questions when I'm talking with a client. So we had been, talking extensively about this decision. She'd gone away and created her list of factors. We'd come back and gone through it. And, there are things that people say in conversations with me, but then they don't show up on their list of factors. And so I'll say, hey, when we first started talking, you talked to me about this or this, and it hasn't even shown up on your list. So what gives? Typically the first thing you talk about is the first thing on your list, and I'm not seeing it here. So she acknowledged that she had totally omitted that. And had we not had that conversation, she probably would have never thought to include it. So we went through and finalized her list of factors, and then we were starting the process of rating her factors, determining how important those factors were to her that at that particular time in her life. And it was a really interesting conversation because she wanted to be kind of in a community of hustle and bustle. She had so much to offer, and she just wanted to be in an environment where she was involved in that type of thing every single day, where she was stimulated with, thought leaders and people who had new ideas and new approaches and were always trying to better themselves and try new and different things each and every day. And that was, one of the factors that she was considering as she chose where she wanted to spend her time moving forward. And as we started talking about how important that particular factor was to her and how highly she was rating it, I'll never forget. I heard a, and then she said, I've never even admitted this to myself, let alone out loud to somebody else. How did you make me do that? And what she had determined was that she had been gifted the family home over the years. She had inherited it, and that's where she lived. But it was a small town. There wasn't a lot going on. And in that moment, she realized that she was staying in that home, not for her benefit and not because it pleased her, but because she had been gifted that home and had been part of the family for so many years, that she was staying there simply to satisfy her family, and simply because society kind of expects you when you inherit something like that to live there. And she realized in that moment that she needed to sell that house and move towns, move to some place where she would be surrounded with the kinds of people that lifted her up and stimulated her. And she was afraid to admit that because of the repercussions that might be felt when she told her family members. But she actually wound up selling the house, and she did move, and she is living a thriving life. And it's all because of that one conversation we had where she had that aha moment. So as we work through the process, the 5-step Decision Smith process, and there's an app. I love that people, want to do things for themselves and kind of, a self-service environment. Not everybody wants to talk to somebody. Again, there's things that are private, or you're just speed. You want things to be answered more quickly. But please don't underestimate the value of talking to somebody who understands how your brain works as you face decision making. Because I know in those particular circumstances, those clients wouldn't necessarily have gotten to those points by themselves. I know that unequivocally. And just last week, I was talking to another client. And again, we spent about 45 minutes, and I just asked question after question after question. And I hope that I'm asking questions in a way that gives you the opportunity to answer or not if you're not comfortable. Because based on the decision you have to make, there are some uncomfortable questions that I do ask you. But I remember working with this client, and after that, about that 45-minute mark, I saw her body just relax. And like that, she didn't say, aha, but the look on her face was, oh, wow, I know what my decision needs to be. And it's just because of the conversation we had. We hadn't even gotten to the point where we were throwing anything in the app. So it was that conversation that was so impactful for her that she knew by the end of that conversation what her decision needed to be, and she was fully confident in moving forward. So I think conversation today was really about understanding how you work when you face decisions. Do you have a system or a process, or do you just approach them willy-nilly? If you use a pros and cons list, let's have another conversation about that. And I'll probably do another podcast about that, because to me, a pros and cons list can be a recipe for disaster. It's a great starting point, but please, 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 I implore you, do not only use a pros and cons list. So, the opportunity to have conversations and say things out loud is cathartic, and it helps you work through as you make decisions. So if you're not following a process, at least do that. At least have those conversations with people. But I'm offering, if it's something that you're faced with, if you've got a tough decision right now that's weighing you down, and you'd like to see it through to the end and not take... Do you know when you Google how long does it take people to make tough decisions? Google says it takes 1 to 4 years for people to make tough decisions. Oh my goodness. Honestly, I can help you through it in 45 minutes. And I just, you've wasted 4 years of your life on something that could take, so little time in the grand scheme of things. So if you have any desire to talk to somebody about your decision, please do that. If you have any desire to work with me to help you through that, I'd be happy to do that as well. Just use something. Don't approach your decisions willy-nilly. Don't pretend that you have all the answers, because I guarantee you, you don't. All right. That's all I've got for today. I want to thank you so much for joining me. And if you're ready to realize your wildest dreams, come and join us in the Wildly Courageous Women Facebook group, where we're changing people's lives one brave decision at a time. I'm Dana Peever. Until next time,
make great decisions, and do life fun.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Wildly Courageous Women. Keep listening to hear more stories of these incredible women realizing their wildest dreams. If you have a story to tell about a decision that you've made that has impacted your life, I'd love to feature you as a guest. Please get in touch and don't forget to grab my latest gift by clicking below. I'm Dana Peever. As always, make great decisions and do life fun.